Hi, and welcome to African Liberties October webinar titled Xenophobia, Toleration, and African Integration. If you can remember, in early September 2019, riots and looting targeting businesses owned by foreign nationals broke out in some part of Johannesburg in South Africa, following the death of a taxi driver. The riots led to the gruesome murder of at least 12 people, many of whom are South Africans. And the attacks drew global condemnation and put South Africa's culture of hospitality in debate. And joining me today to discuss this topic and make sense of everything happening in South Africa is Sara Gon, the head of strategic engagement at the South Africa's Institute of Race Relations in Cape Town, I believe, and Seyi Gesinde, who is the online editor and foreign news editor at the Nigerian Tribune. It's a pleasure to have both of you.
Thanks very much.
First off, it will be, good for our audience to help them make a sense of what has been happening in South Africa. And Sarah, I would like to put the first question to you. Mm-hmm. As you can remember, this state of intolerance towards African immigrants is not new to South Africa, and we've seen this from before the apartheid, the apartheid in 1994, the end of apartheid in 1994, and also after apartheid. And there brings forward the question of why are we seeing this in the South African cultural space? Mm-hmm. Why is it happening? What was the reasoning behind this attack?
Probably no different to anywhere in Africa or actually anywhere in the world. The causes are usually a multitude of things, but usually these things occur during periods of high economic stress. And at the moment, for the South African experience, we're in a lot of economic trouble, and everything that's available is shrinking. So the pressure for the pressure or the perceived pressure for resources is a very easy sort of reason for South Africans to see foreign nationals or immigrants or refugees as being responsible for being partly responsible for taking away what little there is. And so that motivation more than anything very quickly can result in a flare-up of really ugly xenophobic violence. We also have, to some extent, and it depends where you are, there are groups of people who are xenophobic for cultural reasons or religious reasons. These per se will not usually give rise to something like this, but that overlaid with a bad economic situation and a sense, I suppose, of hopelessness, the rationality gives way to threats and to violence, and South Africans are not immune for this. And there might be one element that can be added. I don't know if it would necessarily be different, and that is the fact that partly because of apartheid, there's a level of insularity amongst South Africans. They're not widely travelled. They don't know the rest of Africa. And there's also the element of having almost a slight superiority complex because they came out of and beyond apartheid. And I think those are the mishmash of factors that, to begin with, would explain why it happens here, unfortunately, as often as it does.
Well, that's really sad because, South Africa, just like Nigeria, it's they're like the few of the countries in Africa everybody else looks towards to get cultural development and political development too. And it's really, really absurd when we see both countries entangled in this embarrassing cultural problem. And that's going to lead me to Seyi now. And I hope Seyi can hear me clearly. And we've seen in the last few weeks that the discussion about this main problem has primarily been between the Nigerian government and the South African government. Of course, we saw some appalling responses from some high-ranking officials within the South African government, and this was met with a lot of displeasure from the Nigerian side. And Seyi, can you just kindly let us know if this primary argument from South Africans that Africans should stay in their countries and leave the jobs in South Africa to South Africans, is this a valid argument? Should Africans stay back in their country and not go into South Africa at all for businesses or for whatever purpose?
The answer is, but should people stay away, is definitely not. If there are a variety of reasons, not least of which is, first of all, people often come here under enormous pressure from the societies they've come from, whether it be religious or political or ethnic. So people come looking for a better life in South Africa. And we tend to find, and this is where there's an element, I guess, of jealousy, that very many of the people who do come here are entrepreneurial. They make something where no jobs exist. They create businesses, and sometimes can become very successful. And I think there's an element, part of the jealousy happens from a South African point of view, because there's a sort of feeling that because we came through the crime of humanity that was apartheid, that somehow we are owed something, and therefore we're not expected perhaps to try as hard. Whereas the people coming into the country, they know that all they have is their own hard work and ability to make things work, particularly in an environment where the language is different and the languages are different. But by and large, I mean, certainly migrants, for whatever reason, have added to the colour of the country, have added to the variety, have made, hopefully, some of us more tolerant, more understanding, and seen a little bit more of what the African continent creates.
Very insightful. So, Seyi, can you give your opinion about that?
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
Yeah. I was just asking the primary arguments from many of the South Africans, that are on the side of African immigrants staying in their country, is that there are few jobs in South Africa, and these jobs are not even enough for South Africans to take. And if you have any immigrants come from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, thousands of them coming to take these jobs, do we then need for these African immigrants to stay back in their country?
Okay, yes, good evening, everybody. I'm glad to be here. No, we don't need African immigrants to stay back in their country. What we need to do is on Africans, we are one. There is an African state that all of us see ourselves being into. So by the virtue of the need for us to stay back in our different geopolitical zones, that's why we have countries. But as Africans, we are one. So we need not say that everybody should stay back in their country. What we need to do is to give ourselves a new orientation of how things should be and why we should all coexist. As you can see, all men, the black race, we all belong to the same to the same nationality, which is our African nationality. Even though we have our different backgrounds, but when we love each other, when the leaders also behave well, all of us we not develop enmity against each other. All of us we see ourselves as brothers and sisters. Because I'm a Nigerian, because you're a Ghanaian, because you are a Zimbabwean, because you are a South African, you should stay back in your country. No. Africa will not have to share our resources together. We also do businesses together. We go to school together. We have common things together. We even share the same religion together. So all of us just have to do things in common. Not that we will say that because I'm a Nigerian, I'll go back.
Oh, I think Seyi was having a little bit issue with his connection there. But Sarah, I would like to ask you again. But we cannot just simply shy away from the reality. Of course, South African politicians have consistently complained about the influx of foreign citizens, with some claiming that they were burdening sectors, including the national healthcare system. Yet, the data from the government agency, the Statistics South Africa, showed that there were 2.1 million international immigrants in South Africa, out of a population of 51.7 million in 2011. This is even just a mere faction. So how can you strongly argue that the foreign immigrants are burdening your healthcare sector, and this is one of the reasons why you want them to stay back in their country? Is that a valid argument, Sarah?
It's not. Basically, to the extent that the healthcare system may be inadequate, it would be inadequate for everyone. And coming from a classically liberal perspective, our view is that it is the absence of the free market that allows businesses to flourish and therefore create jobs and therefore to put more tax into the society, and therefore build up and strengthen those institutions so that they can cater for people. I think what is really happening is you'll have a person or a group of people picking on something they've perceived and use it. Whether they believe it or not is actually not clear, but they're using it as an excuse to demand preferential treatment by saying that, we should be preferentially treated, we shouldn't include foreigners, which is essentially just really a form of prejudice. But again, for me, and it highlights a complete lack of policy on the part of government to create a society and an economy in particular that expands to create the wealth that is necessary to pay the taxes to provide for all these services. And so the problem, from my point of view, from a government's point of view, I mean, there are lots of problems with the government's attitude to xenophobia, but one of them is the fact that all of our problems, not just but including xenophobia, lie with poor policy.
Absolutely right. And I would just want to remind our audience that you can follow this, you can drive this discussion on Twitter by using the hashtag Xenophobia Talk and hashtag African Liberty Webinar. And you can also post your questions in the comment section here so I can ask both Sherry and Sarah. But Sarah, I would also like to ask you again, in the aftermath of these ugly attacks, one of the things we saw was the body language of the South African government. I mean, we had one of the police chief and some member of parliament not condemning these attacks. In fact, they gave reasons why African immigrants must stay back in their country. And you want to wonder, is this the same South Africa that went through one of the most horrendous phase that any human society can go through, apartheid? And you remember during the apartheid regime in South Africa, Nigeria, and even some people from old Rhodesia, which is come to know as Zimbabwe today, were part of the people that support the African resistance in South Africa. And do you think that, considering all this past history between South Africans and the African neighbors, do you think it make any sense to have any anti-African or anti-immigrant undertone in the South African government, especially considering that this rhetoric was coming from the highest levels?
No, the problem we have is that, first of all, they're politicians. So if you can see that the way the thinking goes, that if they perceive they would get support or can garner support in the future from people by pandering to their prejudices, they are not beyond doing so. So that's the first thing. Yeah, in other words, what I'm saying is that the South African politicians, by and large, are no better than a whole lot of others, notwithstanding our history. And as you're probably aware, we have gone through 10 years under Jacob Zuma that has literally pulled this country apart. I mean, it has just decimated it economically. So the tendency for some politicians to politic very cheaply, that happens. There will be some amongst them, hopefully not too many, that actually believe it for whatever reason. But I think there's also, amongst the higher echelons, there's an embarrassment that such xenophobia is occurring. Our government generally is not coming up fast enough behind really condemning this. And I would say that one thing about the Nigerian and other governments coming out strongly against our government is it had a salutary effect. And I think this is the sort of thing that would put pressure on the government to see the issue much more clearly and much more logically for what it is, and not just keep protecting South Africans.
See, that's really, really, really shameful on the South African government side. But also, after this goes to Seyi. You see, after the back and forth between the Nigerian government and the South African government, one of the actions we saw from the Nigerian side was, first of all, the recall of the South African High Commission, and also the boycotting of the World Economic Forum. And Seyi, do you think that these two, I don't want to call them sanctions, but acts of condemnation by the government of Nigeria, do you think these are enough measures for just to create a sort of a political deterrence on the South African government side from not reacting rightly to this ugly incident in case it happened next time? Do you think this measures was enough, or would it tougher measures?
I'll tell you where the measures were useful. Is the measures were deeply symbolic, and by that I mean that South Africa, since the end of apartheid, South Africa has tended to see itself as something special. And the problem in reality is that South Africa is not special. It's another country with big problems like a lot of other countries. And it's had a lot of difficulty to get the leadership to see that we're neither going to get nor do we deserve special treatment from anyone. And although they were symbolic, they were powerful. I mean, I don't think the government has ever had to experience that sort of thing. And from a continental-wide political point of view, it would have been very chastening for our government, and not least a bit embarrassing.
Seyi, what do you think? Do you think these measures by the Nigerian government are strong enough?
Yes. The first thing the government should do is to try as much as possible to protect its nationality within the country and outside the country, which is what the president of Nigeria has done. When you won't want to wait behind and see people of the government of people of other country where you already signed certain agreement with in trade and other things to be killing your citizens, you also have to take a measure, which our president has done. Recalling the ambassador to South Africa and also boycotting the conference. These are means to register a protest that what your people are doing for my people, I don't want it. So now the protest has been registered, and the world has known that Nigeria was at the receiving end in South Africa. South Africans are in Nigeria, and they live well. They are well taken care of. But Nigerians in South Africa, well, to an extent, at least a section of Nigerians, were not well being taken care of before the president went there. So it was the killing that actually necessitated the reason for the president to recall the ambassador and to boycott the conference. Now, the measure has been taken, and both presidents have met, and they have discussed the differences, and I believe the measure to an extent is okay. Afterwards, they have not heard of any other issue, even though there have been rumors of Nigeria being killed, even after the president of those two countries met. So there will be ongoing measures, which I believe our presidents still have to do. But the president of Nigeria, the biggest economy in Africa, a lot of opportunities are here in Nigeria, and also South African government also have businesses in Nigeria. And those businesses are being protected by Nigerian government. So also, South African government also need to protect Nigerians' investment and Nigerians in South Africa. Well, I want to believe to a great extent the action that the president took, I sent a signal to the South African government that what is causing the problem must surely be addressed. What are the things that are causing the problem? Why are two brothers killing each other? I think the causes of these problems must be highlighted and must be sorted out. The calling of the ambassador alone may not be enough. The two leaders coming together to meet alone may not be enough. But there has to be good security measures that must be put in place to ensure that Nigerians that stay in South Africa, they are well protected, and also businesses of Nigeria in South Africa are also well protected. I believe it's an ongoing thing. The diplomatic move has already been done in that the president had to travel from Nigeria to South Africa. That is diplomatic measure that he has to add to this. But beyond that, he is not staying in South Africa with Nigerians. He's staying in Nigeria. So let the South African government put security architecture in place to ensure that people that stay in particular area, they are well taken care of. If you are obedient in another man's land and you follow the law, you should not be punished for an offense you do not commit.
To stay, any African has the right to stay anywhere in Africa. We are all Africans, and of course that's the reality. But I also want to ask, to be quite honest here, we can't just stay on the one side of condemning this attacks alone and not facing the reality. Well, the reality in this case is that majority of the African governments that had citizens affected in these xenophobia attacks haven't done enough to keep their people at home. First of all, I mean, you go to Nigeria, for instance, the economy was in shambles in the last 2 years thereabout before the recent winnings for the government. But that's one reason. You go to Zimbabwe before Mnangagwa came in, Mugabe created a shambles in that country, and you want to think that for a second, you want to think that this argument is valid. The African government really need to do enough to keep their people home, and if at all they need to do enough. Sarah, what do you think are the measures African government needs to take to keep their people at home?
They need to genuinely embrace democracy and liberal democracy, classically liberal democracy at that, because basically it's about, I mean, I think there's absolutely no doubt about it. It's about people having dignity by having the right to live where they want, the right to own property, the right to a decent education, and the right to follow the job or the career that they wish to follow. And of course, that means cutting down on corruption, which is something we can absolutely all agree on it. But essentially, people generally, the vast majority of people, wherever they are on the continent, don't want to per se leave their countries. They've got family ties, they've got cultural ties. What's familiar is what most people want to live around. And as long as a government chooses an autocratic route and doesn't allow those things to happen, and I mean, Zimbabwe is an appalling example. Things get so much worse. What is going to happen? People are going to leave for somewhere that is better, even if it's not good in itself or not great or has its own problems. As long as it's perceived to be better, people will move, and that's the story of history, and it applies as equally in Latin America as it does in in Europe or Asia. Those are not. Those almost go without saying. That's what you do. That's what you need to do to keep your people at home, helping the economy at home grow.
Sure, that's right, Sarah. But Nigeria has, I don't want to say most immigrants in majority of the African countries. And why are Nigerians always leaving their country? Why, if the government is doing anything, if at all doing any, why are Nigerians always leaving their country and putting themselves in situations that are really, really appalling, like we saw in South Africa? Why?
Okay, yes. Why do Nigerians always leave their country? I think that's a very big question. Well, before now, in early 70s, Nigeria has a very good economy, and the connecting factor, which is the naira and dollar now, the naira was so strong to the extent that it was even higher. Now there is a rat race for dollar. When you have a very weak currency for any serious exchange at the global market, it's a very big problem to anybody, any businessman or any money conscious person. So the first reason why Nigerians have to leave home for foreign country is because of the search for greener pasture. The resources are not that adequate. I said it earlier that in the 70s, as we rightly know, dollar was not as big as naira. Naira was more valuable in global exchange than dollar. But now it is 360 naira thereabout to only $1. Meaning that if you have $1,000, you have 360,000 naira. So the rush for higher price, higher money for a living wage, not just ordinary minimum wage, is why people will have to seek for greener pasture, somewhere else. Then again, look at Nigeria. There are two commodities that power the economy. The number one is the power itself, the electricity. Number two is the fuel, because if you don't really have the electricity being given by the government, you have to power your generator, so you have to buy fuel. So these are two expensive commodities that if you don't really have a very solid financial backup, you may not be able to sustain your business, you may not be able to live a good life as a Nigerian. So people want a better life. People want an environment where they can be able to use their resources well. People want security as well. So these are the reasons why Nigerians will have to seek for greener pasture outside the country. However, those that stay at home don't have something good doing. But it is not everybody that have the mind of staying back to make use of the available resources and turn it into something good and something big in return. But going by your question, just to summarize, why Nigerians travel out is because number one, they want a greener pasture because the economy at home is not very good. Number two, they want more security. Number three, they probably think that there is something better abroad than what we have in Nigeria, even in terms of the quality of education, quality of daily living, and quality of criminal and justice system. These are the reasons that people that have opportunity believe that they have to go. And more so, the youth of today also, they are not well, orientated. They don't really have, some of them don't really have good mentors, that they can look up to. That is why all these criminalities and all sorts of things just, populate the issues that we have to contend with at home now. But basically, bad economy is a very strong reason why people have to travel out of Nigeria to go and seek for greener pasture out of the country. Thank you.
And I can attest to the fact that pasture is not always greener, as they say, on the other side. But let's just take a more holistic view at the background of this problem. And I'm talking to Sarah now. You see, I remember a few weeks ago, probably a month ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa said the job crisis in South Africa is a serious and deep crisis. And, about 29% of the South African population workforce are out of jobs. And that's about 6.7 million people of the 51 million people. That's an enormous figure to consider. So what do you think the government has done in the last few years to address this problem? And in reality, is the African government doing anything at all to address this problem?
Well, in my view, not very much, because what's happened is the ANC is now it's always had a socialist, it hasn't always. Since the early 50s, it has moved further and further to a socialist ideal, and it is now in the last few years. In fact, it has speeded up in the last 2 years since Jacob Zuma resigned. It has speeded up considerably, because I think that the ANC has taken the view that we are now in the final stage of the Marxist revolution. And the problem with that is that they are trying desperately not to resort to the involvement of the private sector to help remedy a lot of the economic ills. And you see it, because we've got a lot of red tape, which is probably a problem in most countries in Africa, to starting a business. The ANC seems to be very reluctant to concede that the people they don't have control over are the most benefit in terms of creating businesses and creating jobs. And you've probably heard about Eskom, about electricity crisis. And I mean, we run the very real risk of running out of electricity because of corruption and what we call tenderpreneurship, and really selling to your buddies who cannot provide the service. And that is what has characterized the Zuma administration. But we're in a situation we haven't decided which way to go, or rather the government hasn't decided which way to go. They're trying to look for a plan to deal with the electricity. And we know that one possibility is at least partial privatization, if not all aspects of it. And we're just not getting there. And I think there is a very, very strong ideological avoidance of bringing the private sector in. And of course, this is this is complete tragedy because we know that socialist economics don't work. We have all the examples of collapse that we need to have, and we have the skills and a preparedness by South African business, white and black, to be involved to make the difference. But we have to be free to do it. We can't do it on the government's terms, and we certainly can't do it if the government won't let us in. We'll just keep on doing it to the extent that we can. And of course, with the high levels of unemployment, with the crime, with the near destruction of the quality of the police service, and with the possible implosion of electricity, people who can afford to, and they're not only whites, they're across, and that is this, is, of course, where we've come from dictates, it doesn't dictate. It is dictating where we are. In other words, the government often blames apartheid for where we are. And as far as I'm concerned, your past, you can't ignore your past. Your past must inform your future. But it mustn't be what dictates where your future goes, because nothing is going to happen that way. You're going to be moribund in the sense of victimhood, and nothing changes in that situation.
I want to ask you here. You see, Seyi, talk about how this violence in Nigeria was fueled by the lack of education, the lack of employment, and look back at South Africa. Majority of the people that were involved in those ugly scenes in Johannesburg were youths. Yeah, of course they were unemployed, but you want to take a critical look. Some of them are actually people that haven't really done too much in establishing business, but was just, I don't want to say social miscreants, thugs and people that are so invested in crime and violence. So do you think that an effective way for the South African government to address this problem would be to criminalize xenophobic attack or xenophobia?
The answer is no, but I say this: I'm a great fan, and I was a lawyer for 17 years. I'm not a great fan of legislating more and more crimes, because all the xenophobia will manifest itself in a crime. It'll be assault, it will be murder, it may be hostage taking, the range of things. The crime is the crime. What should affect the sentence if somebody is caught and tried? It should be an aggravating factor that xenophobia was behind it. Because they've declared, they want to declare racism a crime. They've declared racism. The problem is that you can't easily change what people think, and you don't necessarily know what they think, and B, that you end up potentially prosecuting people for what they have said that reflects what they've done, but it may be harmful and hurtful, but it's not criminal. And as I say, for me with xenophobia, you deal with the crime as it is, and then you sentence according to the fact. You add weight to the sentence if it's a xenophobic rationale. The problem here, of course, is with South Africa is the chance of anyone actually being tried is way too low. The police are often accused of xenophobia themselves. Crimes are not properly investigated, and we really have a very weakened police system. And of course, the one thing the government must provide is safety and security for all the people who live in the country. Everything else, pretty much leave it to the people themselves. But the one thing, if the government does nothing else, it should provide safety and security, which it doesn't. The other thing, I'm inclined to think that I feel very strongly that leadership plays a crucial role. When leaders speak out repeatedly and very firmly against something, you are likely at least to change people's behavior. And if you change people's behavior, you may ultimately change their attitude. But if you can at least, by speaking out vigorously and repeatedly, and condemning xenophobia properly, you have some effect on calming the issue. Sorry, I wanted to say something else, but so I'm a great our leadership has failed us on that score. We've seen it with things like towards the end of the second half of Jacob Zuma's era, is that it started to bring anti-white sentiment into a lot of what the government said and did, and race has become and the accusation particularly of whites being racist against black has grown, has become a huge media and talking point, and it's ended up in the court. Our research, however, has shown that racism per se is way down the list of what people want from, of what people expect the government to deal with. Jobs is always the top of that list, whether that list is 10 items or 12 or 14. Racism is at the bottom and jobs are at the top. Xenophobia, unfortunately, as a form of racism, has crept up, or allegations of xenophobia. But the reality is the government is not reflecting the common sense of the people. And therein lies the problem. So the least the government can do, if it can't get our police force right, and it's not yet making it easier to do business in South Africa, is speak out against it and speak out properly. And we're not seeing that. But I think that's on both sides. I think in Nigeria, in South Africa, wherever it occurs, because we've seen with the genocides in the continent that what's really stoked the fires towards a genocide have been words, but words particularly approved of and uttered by our leadership.
Absolutely right, Sarah. And one of the things that I was thinking about before this webinar was the response from Ramaphosa. I mean, it kind of struck me, especially to know that, he's the poster boy for the ANC right now. I mean, he's the president. And you want to look back at the history of the ANC. And is this the same ANC we saw during the apartheid regime? Of course not. So, and we seen that on the other side, the corruption charges against Jacob Zuma, and the abhorrence of what is now the Zuma regime. And you want to think, is this the ANC of the old? And if not, what has happened to the ANC?
But you see, what you have to remember, and the government and the ANC, including President Ramaphosa, tried to avoid, is the fact that they were there. In other words, from the sort of the late period of Thabo Mbeki through the whole of the period of Jacob Zuma, Cyril Ramaphosa and his entire National Executive Committee, they were there in some form or another. No one came out to speak against it, or no one felt free to do it. So you have a situation where all the ills that South Africa is facing, and all the many ills they're facing, the people who are trying to deal with them now were responsible for causing them in the first place. And as you say, it's a morally and legally corrupt party as far as I'm concerned. So it now lacks the credibility when it once had huge reserves of credibility. That's not the case anymore.
Absolutely, Sarah. And it's just really, really unbelievable that, this beautiful, very highly conservative party is just, is like an embodiment of the wrong reasons right now. Corruption against Jacob Zuma, the lack of genuine Africanness in the response of Cyril Ramaphosa, and all this, all the controversies surrounding the ANC. And that brings me back to Seyi now. And Seyi, immediately after the attacks in South Africa, or during the first 2 weeks of September, we saw the response from the leader of the ruling All Progressives Congress, Mr. Adams Oshiomhole. And one of the things he said was, Nigerians should completely, come back home. We should boycott all South African goods. We should, make a lot of sanctions against South Africa. Some of his recommendations are absolutely appalling. And this brings to question: is the APC, or does the APC have the right philosophical understanding to, first of all, keep Nigerians at home, and second of all, make sure that the problems that were identified during the week are addressed effectively?
Okay. Well, let me address it this way because some diplomatic issues are actually involved. The president of Nigeria, who is the commander in chief of the armed forces and who is the leader of Nigeria, had traveled to South Africa. Himself and the South African leader, they have actually spoken together and they've renewed their interest, and they've spoken on the reason why nationals of both countries must not be killed, whether in South Africa or in Nigeria. And let me also remind us of that as of 2018, Nigeria and South Africa trade flow was put around $4.5 billion. And if you have put your investments in a country to the tune of 4.5 billion, I don't think you want that investment to crumble. I don't think you want that investment to be destroyed. So if the leader of a party, perhaps who spoke out of anger, said that Nigerians should come back home, and perhaps maybe South Africa and Nigeria also should go back home, that would not be the solution to the problem. Because if both of you have entered into a trade agreement that has summed up to $4.5 billion, I'm not sure you want that business to crumble. So I think, let me just take it as that perhaps he spoke in anger. Let me just put it that way. But be that way, as we spoke earlier about what are the causes, what are the reasons why this thing persists, I think that is what leaders of those countries should dwell on more. Let us look at the reason why people are killing each other. A sensible and a reasonable human being will not just wake up one day and want to kill somebody else. It is because of these cultural differences, and more so, it is because of the gap, too much gap, the basic gap between the rich and the poor that is causing this problem. And again, because of lack of orientation on our people. And again, if you come to African society, you will see it yourself that the gap between the rich and the poor is just too wide. Where the poor people stay, you can easily know that it is the poor people that stay in this place, and where the rich people stay, you can easily know that those that stay here are the rich people. So let us celebrate local communities. Let us take development to local communities. Don't let those that stay in local communities live with abject poverty. Let there be good roads in local areas. Mind you, it is from these local areas also that things that we call raw materials also come from. Raw materials that the rich people dwell on to build, to sustain their industries. This is where they all come from. Let there be power resources. Let there be basic amenities of life that people in the local community can also dwell on. Then again, let the people that are going into government, let them be sincere to themselves and to the people. Let them run the government to favor the interests of the people, not the interests of themselves alone. People go to government in Africa to steal funds, to steal money. Somebody who you all grew up together in the same community, who found his way into a government position, suddenly becomes a multi-millionaire, a rich person, and the people around him begins to envy him. These are the causes of all these problems. People are not growing together in riches. People are not growing together in knowledge. People are not growing together in opportunities. Also, let us teach ourselves. It means for us to love each other. We shouldn't release words that will create enmity amongst ourselves. If you say that Nigerians should leave South Africa, that will not solve any problem. If you say that South Africa should be sent back to their country, that will not solve any problem. But let the security architecture of our communities also be very, very strong. Don't go to government and steal money and think that when you return back to that community, people will embrace you. No. And let me also say this. Politicians also use these people, they set people against each other because these people are very useful for them when it comes to the electionary period. Because when you are not giving them their due rights, and when during the election, you give them peanuts to vote for you, begin to give them food stuff, share food stuff for them to vote for you, begin to promise them foreign trips to vote for you. You don't want them to get developed, you don't want them to be liberated, you don't want them to know their rights. Because you want to keep them in perpetual darkness so that they can see you as the kind of God that they look up to. These are the reasons why our politicians say what they say, because they don't even want people to be developed in the first instance. They want people to know their rights. So I will say that the chairman of the ruling party should not go the way of encouraging the government to say Nigerian people should come back. When they come back to the country, what do you have to offer them? Have you created jobs? Have you created more opportunities? Have you reduced the cost of living? Have you reduced the cost of education? What are they coming back to fall on? Those that came back from South Africa recently, what has the government engaged them with? These are the issues we need to interrogate. We don't need to send a speech as a leader. Send speech or speeches that will be reassuring to people. That will let them know that if I don't have something good today, I can have it tomorrow. Let people come back to Nigeria and see good roads. Let people come to Nigeria and see that economy is better. Let people come to Nigeria and see that there is something we also call Nigeria dream. They will not want to travel out of Nigeria. Let there be good hospitals in Nigeria. Let there be good water system in Nigeria. Let there be good transportation in Nigeria. Let there be cheap foods in Nigeria.
Right.
Let there be basic things of life in Nigeria. People will want to stay.
Right, Seyi, and I agree. And you see, this problem that needs to be addressed by the Nigerian government should resonate across board. It needs to be addressed by the Zimbabwean government, the Mozambican government. In fact, every government in sub-Saharan Africa to keep their people home in the first place, and not to make them vulnerable to all this, problems in South Africa and elsewhere. It happens elsewhere, not only South Africa. And Sarah, I'm going to come back to you. One of the things that we saw in the last few weeks is the question about the criminality or the rate of criminal violence in South Africa, and does these criminality in South Africa have anything to do with the anti-immigrant rhetorics? And my question will be that, of course, we know South Africa has one of the documented criminal rates in Africa, and the majority of the people that are in the streets protesting and engaging in the riots, as I said earlier, some of them are convicted criminals. Do you think that the rate of criminality in the country has in any way contributed to the anti-immigrant rhetorics or xenophobic attacks we've seen in recent weeks?
Well, I think you mentioned it earlier, and one of the problems is where you've got high levels of unemployment, inadequate education, so people come out of school really ill-equipped to do decent jobs or follow professions. You've got young men who are idle, and if they're idle, sometimes getting involved in a riot or a protest, there may be very understandable strong feelings about it, but particularly for young men, it's an opportunity to blow off a lot of steam, and that steam becomes expressed with violence. There was some question about the fact that the recent events that happened in Johannesburg had been partly or entirely sort of stoked by a particular grouping of people, and I wasn't sure if it was just this particular interest group and or any a political formation. But that's not impossible. It's not very common in South Africa, but it's certainly not impossible. But the problem is we do generally have a horrible tendency to resolve our problems through violence, and we've recently seen a lot of media attention and social media attention paid on violence against women, particularly in relationships and outside of relationships. Our rape levels are very, very high. So these sorely aggravate any area of discontent. And so it doesn't take much to light the spark and see some horrific incidents of violence. I mean, not just violence. I mean, really, really dreadful, setting people alight, which harks back also to some extent to the later years of the struggle, and it being used as a tactic to deal with perceived opponents, real or otherwise. So it certainly doesn't help things. But again, between strong leadership and growing the economy, those are really the main thrust. The other thing that occurred to me while Shay was speaking was perhaps in reality between Nigeria and South Africa, and South Africa and any other country that may have the same issue, that the more bilateral trade you have, the more you have to protect. So the more trade you have, the more money a country has, the more they have to protect on both sides. And maybe we have to be looking at our respective self-interest in each other's countries.
You're absolutely right there. I think perhaps the most effective way to cure this, indifference between both countries is trade. I mean, trade solves a lot of problems. If you have a lot of financial resources to protect in a country, you will find every means to work things out with that country. We're seeing that with America and China. Even though both countries literally on paper do not like each other, because of trade, they cannot, make bad decisions as regards some of their interests, like North Korea and so on. So, but that brings me to another question about trade. About trade. Just sorry to cut you short. On trade, we saw the ratification of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement a while ago, and at the center of the Africa AFCFTA is Nigeria and South Africa, because these are the two biggest economies in the continent. So, one of our listeners here, as we even is a writing fellow at African Liberty, want to know if this, indifference will in any way affect the implementation of the African CFTA, or these, as Donald Trump always like to say, the spirit of the agreement. So I don't know which of you want to take the question.
I'm a bit of a cynic, and the reason about sort of multilateral trade agreement in Africa, and the reason is that if you look at Europe, and Europe presumably is the model, because the EU, the 27, I'm not sure whether to count them or not at the moment. But the thing is that as long as countries are in the state they are, such as Mozambique and Zimbabwe, even if there can be trade, I believe that in order to belong to a union of sorts, whatever you want to call it, countries have to reach a certain standard in a whole lot of areas, like democratic governance, freedom of free market, freedom of expression, etc., etc. Because if they don't, it usually means that the economies are going to look like the rest of the country, poor and intolerant. And I don't see that you can have those sort of multilateral agreements really working. I think countries have to need to come into those agreements when certain thresholds are met. Otherwise, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not convinced. I think Nigeria, probably Namibia, Botswana, etc. There may be others, but I just can't think of them at the top of my head, can enter into those, can become part of those agreements. But Zimbabwe and Mozambique, highly unlikely. And I think as a result, if the gap between the countries economically is too wide, it's not going to work. It needs to be more incremental.
Right. Every African country has an assignment to do to stop this scourge of intolerance.
And maybe that's the enforcement.
Absolutely. And Seyi, I want to ask you now. We cannot shy away from the fact that there is a sense of competitiveness between Nigeria and South Africa in all ramifications, and I want to know, how you think both countries can move away from this problem, to addressing, things that will move both of their interests forward, like trade, like, cultural integration, political, friendliness, and, working together in multinational organizations like the UN to promote African interests. How do you think both South Africa and Nigeria can work this out?
Okay, well, I think the first thing we need to do is to respect each other as individual countries. I think we need to do that first. Let us respect each other as individual countries, and also let us protect and work towards the dictate of agreement we both signed together as two giants of Africa. The government should not compromise its own agreements. Talking of government of South Africa, and Nigerian government also should not compromise its own agreement as well. It is a symbiotic thing. Then number two, let the South African government give a good orientation to the South African people. Let them know that Nigerians are in South Africa because they are granted visa to come into the country, not that they crash into the country. Let them know that Nigerians are trading legally in South Africa and they have the right and the backup of the government. And also, let the South African government be truthful. Let it also be able to share resources equally between the South African nationals. I don't really want to dabble into the issue of, the internal issue of South Africa anyway. But from the report that we got to know, we understood the fact that it was the African people, nationals, that are not allowing you to get jobs. Some South Africans are not getting jobs, and they are blaming.
Seyi, that was a breaking transmission a few seconds ago. Can you just repeat what you said in the last 15 seconds, please?
What I'm saying is that the South African government should let any Nigerian in South Africa is living in South Africa because the South African government are giving that Nigerian the right to enter the country and to do the business he or she is doing in South Africa. This is why I say this. I'm saying it because we have it on good authority that some South African people who those that having good jobs in South Africa, there is a plurality of job now. There is a set of South Africans who are not getting jobs, and there's another set of South Africans who are getting jobs. But those that are getting jobs, they are getting more of government backup, and people are protesting against them that why can't they also get jobs? Now they are pointing accusing fingers at Nigerians and other African nationals that are trading as South Africa as the reason why the South African cannot be employed. That is not true. Nigerians in South Africa are doing their to do so. So if South Africans are not getting job and they see Nigerians doing their work, it is because perhaps the government of South Africa has probably not given them created job where they can also work, or they are not qualified to get certain jobs. So I think there should be good orientation. That's what I'm talking about. There should be good orientation. We should not set ourselves against each other. We should not see ourselves as the reason for our misfortunes. If Nigerians are doing well in South Africa, it is because they have worked for it. If South Africans that think they are the owner of the country, they are not doing well, they should ask for why they are not doing government. Not that they will now launch attack against Nigeria because Nigerians are doing well. Then again, our own embassy in South Africa or our representative in South Africa should also represent Nigeria.
Seyi pointed out is that there needs to be a sort of reorientation. I don't know if I absolutely agree with that, but it's some form of public engagement to tell people about the problems that lies in intolerance, and to tell the history of South Africa's hospitality and so-called the rainbow factor in South Africa. So I want to come back to Sara. What do you think your organization, the South African Institute of Race Relations, has been doing to help address this problem? Because primarily, we've not only seen intolerance of blacks against blacks, we've seen blacks against whites, and we've seen white against black, and especially from the government, the recent policy of expropriation without compensation. Primarily, I don't want to say holistically, but primarily the spirit targets white farm owners. So these are problems related to race and racial or ethnic intolerance. So what do you think your organization, the Institute of Race Relations, and other organization of similar orientation are doing to address this problem? Seyi identified the problem of reorientation, so to speak.
Well, basically, we critique policy, or potential policy, and we probably have the highest media presence of any NGO in the country, in that we are openly and repeatedly critical about proposed policy like expropriation without compensation. And what we do is we not only write and research extensively on it and put it out into the media, but we also give talks and try and influence opposition parties, even the ANC, if they'll listen. They did at one point. We could get a little bit of their ear, but we try to essentially affect opinion wherever we find we can. We make representations to Parliament against policy decisions, against proposed legislation. So we've got, I think, quite an unusually large public imprint, even though, like most NGOs, we suffer from small financial resources and we can't afford to appoint the number of people we want to. But it really is about that, putting out the other ideas, keep on exposing as many people as we can in as many ways as we can. I think probably the one area that we need to, that's more difficult to get to, ironically, is youth. And I would love us to be able to get exposure much more directly to youth. But I was going to make a suggestion, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the more I think about it, the more I'm not sure it is tongue-in-cheek. Nigerian football is world-renowned. Ours is not. Our football is appalling. And I think, lend us a Nigerian coach. And I'm saying that in the sense that this is the way I'm looking at it. If you can get some sense of Nigerian competence and ability into an area that the young, or not young, South Africans feel passionate about, that can somehow help to bridge that divide. Because particularly if you get a Nigerian coach to improve our national team, or actually any of our club teams, but really improve it, you will see attitudes towards Nigerians in general change because of the attitude of that one single person. Now, I realize obviously it may be damn difficult and not at all feasible, but it gives you an idea of what I'm of where I'm going in this, is to somehow find, it could be a business leader, a religious leader, or somebody involved in this field that you and I are both in, which is promoting classical liberalism, somehow to get into an area that people desperately want to see something better happen, and Nigeria helps us to make that happen. I'm not entirely sure what that would be, as I say, other than football. But we've had in all our sports, mostly, we have, funny enough, we have a very high number of foreign coaches in our football system. I don't know if we've ever had an African foreign coach. And I know that sounds a bit sort of shallow, but therein is the thing. Now, I'm watching the World Cup rugby, which is great because South Africa's in the finals as of today. But if you look at the teams, the Japanese team, which was nowhere a couple of years ago, has a New Zealand coach. And there's no doubt the foreign input, the different way of looking at things, the different styles. I mean, Japan only fell by the wayside when South Africa played them last week. Otherwise, they'd won, I think, every match in a row that they'd played. So it's sometimes through things like sport, if one can do it through culture. It's the things that people are drawn to for relief, for socializing, for just not thinking about the other problems, that may help to point the way to break down those bigoted attitudes.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Sarah, sports and cultural exchanges.
Send us your sportsmen. We'll send you our singers. I don't know, anything that works.
Yeah, I mean, culture and sport is one of the strongest way of promoting integration. But I want to go back to Seyi now, and I want Sarah to also put her opinion on this. And this will be our last question. during the weeks that trailed this attacks in the first week of September, we didn't see too much of strong and decisive condemnation or I don't want to say sanctions, acts of reprimanding by the African Union or by specific African countries. And this is unlike what's going on in Europe, where you have, and in Europe, for instance, where Russia literally annexed Ukraine, there was a tremendous outpour of condemnation and sanctions against the Russian, government, not the Russian, the country, so to speak, but the government itself. And this sort of created deterrence from, Russia, continue with the annexation of Ukraine. And it makes me wonder why African governments or even the so-called African Union, I hope I don't upset the Pan-Africanists here. Why haven't there been sort of a strong, decisive action taken against, the South African government with the way it's handled this problem? Or do you guys think there should be a more unified? I'm not a fan of a unified action by African countries, but do you think there should be more actions or reprimanding by fellow African governments? Seyi, I'd like it for you to go first. I hope you got my question, Seyi.
Yeah, it's just absolutely important that anybody that has wrong is reprimanded, is sanctions, is rebuked on what.
Yes, sir.
All right, I think Seyi still having a problem. Sarah, can you just tell us, what should be the ultimate solution to this problem?
Ideally, if the African Union had the to condemn this sort of behaviour and have an impact on countries' leadership, that would be well and good. But frankly, I don't think the AU has it. Because I don't think the AU has it generally, and I think that's because, unlike the European Union, everyone is a member unless they've come to power through a coup, and I'm not sure if that applies as much as it should. The problem is that the AU's backyard isn't clean enough, and I think that's that we can't at this stage look to the AU for saying anything that'll have an impact.
I'm not a big fan of the AU either. Seyi, do you have anything to say about the way African governments or the African Union can respond to this problem in case it happens again?
Yes, Ibrahim, yes, this is what I want to say about it, and this is what I was saying earlier, that the African government or African Union, as the case may be, has not really come out to register its presence as the headship of the Union of African Nations. The African Union is supposed to be a body where issues of common interest will have to be addressed, where issues that have to be of African interest will have to be addressed, irrespective of any country that is probably having issue with each other. The African Union should not take sides, should just address the issue and ensure that Africa is a peaceful environment for all nationalities of Africa. We have not really seen this much coming from the African Union. African Union has not really registered its presence. We all hear of what happened, or we all see what happened with the European Union. Presently, there is Brexit issue in Europe. European Union is taking to ensure that things work out well for Britain. We can see how the European Union is mediating in the matter, but we are not seeing the same happening in Africa. We are not seeing the headship of an African body taking position and ensuring that things go on well in two warring nations. It is not until when it escalates to war or any crisis that is close to war, the African nation should not come up and do things that it has to do. African nation has to check on the governments that are not making his country habitable, secured for other nationals, of other African countries staying within to live peacefully and do their business peacefully. African Union has to rise up to the challenges of its leadership position and ensure that socially Africans they relate well, culturally Africans relate well, politically Africans relate well, even business-wise, the Africans relate well. There have been certain treaties and agreements that have been signed at the African Union level. Any country that violates agreement should be dealt with. There should be check and balances. There should be law that guides operation. For instance, we are talking about the after the free trade agreement with African. I know there are terms and conditions. You are not just going to open your borders alone and allow neighboring countries to just pack in contraband to your country. No, there must be law that guides the trade that you do with each other. There must be law that guides your peace, your coexistence with each other. Any country that violates the law, penalties are also stated in those agreements. Let the African Union rise up and penalize any country that violates the agreement. There is trade agreement, there is political agreement, there is cultural agreement. People go on tourism. It is just normal for us to move across each other's borders and respect rules and regulations. Anybody that violates that, African Union, which is the headship of all, should ensure that things work out fine.
Right, right, right. I cannot agree more. The African Union needs to step up, and if the primary goal, the founding goal of the African Union is to integrate Africa, and if xenophobia is a problem against African integration, then that needs to be addressed decisively. So I would like to ask Sarah just the last question, and I would just like if you can answer me in one sentence. One of our listeners is pressing me to ask this question: do you think xenophobia or xenophobic attacks is as a result of the colonial or neo-colonial mentality still in South Africa?
I think the government may say that it is, but I say that the attacks are. Some of it has to do with where we've come from, but it's very much where we are at the moment. As things have, earlier in the sort of up to 2007, we had a growth rate at one point of higher than the global average, which was 5%. We were 5%; they were below. Now we have almost no growth rate at all, and your growth rate always tracks your growth rate attracts your economy, and your economy jobs, etc. And funnily enough, looking at the statistics over the last 25 years, are very high levels of violence for whatever reason. They've increased and decreased over time, but not by huge amounts. So in other words, whatever we had coming into these last 25 years, to a greater or lesser extent, is what we've got. So we have a whole host of problems as to why we have such violent crime. And xenophobia has unfortunately just become one of those reasons.
Great. That will do it all for this edition of African Liberty Webinar. I want to say special thanks to Sara Gon from the IIR in South Africa and Seyi Gesinde from the Nigerian Tribune, Nigeria.